The mysterious gay farm. I never imagined that working on a farm would change my life forever. But then I met him, my boss, powerful, wealthy, and untouchable. At least, that's what I thought. But as the days passed, the way he looked at me shifted. The tension between us grew, thick and undeniable. And then, one night, everything changed. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss more captivating stories like this one. Now, prepare yourself for a tale of forbidden desire, power, and a love that was never meant to happen, but did. The sun hung low in the sky, casting golden hues over the vast fields of Ravenwood Ranch. The air was thick with the scent of fresh hay and damp earth, the rhythmic sound of horses in the stables blending with the distant hum of crickets. I wiped the sweat off my forehead, feeling the familiar burn of a long day's work. I had been working here for nearly 6 months now. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. My hands were calloused from fixing fences, my boots permanently dust-covered from walking these endless acres. I had left home young, searching for something, though I wasn't sure what. All I knew was that I needed to get away, start fresh. What I didn't expect was him, Alexander Hale, owner of Ravenwood. Powerful, wealthy, and completely out of reach. He wasn't like the other ranchers. Most of them were rough, sun-weathered men who had spent their whole lives on farms. But Alexander was different. He looked like he belonged in a high-rise office, not here. Tall, broad-shouldered, with piercing green eyes that could make anyone freeze in place. His dark hair was always neatly styled, and his expensive button-up shirts, rolled up to his forearms, set him apart from the usual flannel-wearing ranchers. He was refined, distant, untouchable. And yet, there were moments where his gaze lingered on me a little too long. Moments where his voice softened when he spoke to me. Moments where I could swear he wanted to say something but never did. It was driving me insane. I was just a worker here, nothing more. He was my boss, someone I had no business looking at the way I did. But today, something felt different. I had just finished feeding the horses when I heard his voice behind me. "Joey." I turned so fast I nearly dropped the bucket in my hands. There he was. Alexander stood a few feet away, his sleeves rolled up, his hands resting on his hips. The last rays of sunlight caught in his hair, giving him an almost unreal glow. I swallowed hard. "Boss." His lips twitched at the formality, but he didn't correct me. "I need you to stay late tonight," he said. "There's something I want to show you." Something about the way he said it sent a shiver down my spine. Sure," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "What do you need?" He tilted his head slightly, watching me, studying me. "You'll see," he said simply. And then, without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, heart hammering in my chest, wondering what the hell was happening. Night fell over the ranch, the air turning crisp as I finished up my last task. I couldn't shake the feeling of anticipation crawling up my spine. What did Alexander want? Why was he acting so different? I made my way toward the main barn, where he had told me to meet him. The massive wooden doors were slightly ajar, a dim light glowing from inside. I hesitated for a moment, then stepped in. Alexander was there, leaning against a wooden post, arms crossed. The smell of leather and hay filled the air, mixing with something else, something charged. He looked up as I entered. "You came," he said softly. I forced a chuckle. Didn't think ignoring the boss was a smart move. A flicker of amusement crossed his face, but it faded quickly. He pushed off the post, taking slow steps toward me. The closer he got, the heavier the air felt. "I wanted to talk to you," he said. "Somewhere private." My breath caught. Private. I nodded, unable to find my voice. He stopped just a foot away from me, close enough that I could see the hint of stubble along his jaw, the way his green eyes darkened in the dim light. Joey. He said my name like it was something delicate, like he wasn't sure he should be saying it at all. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. Yeah? Silence stretched between us, and then he reached out. His fingers grazed my wrist, just barely, just enough to send a shock through my entire body. I froze. His touch was brief, almost like he was testing something, testing me. Then, just as quickly as he reached out, he pulled away. Forget it, he murmured, turning away. It's nothing. But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. And as I stood there, pulse racing, watching Alexander walk away into the darkness of the barn, I knew. This was just the beginning. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him. The way he stood in the barn, the way his fingers had barely brushed against my wrist, the way his voice had dropped to a whisper when he said my name. It wasn't nothing. I knew that. But Alexander, he had pulled away. He had walked off like it had never happened, like I was supposed to just forget it. I couldn't. I didn't want to. The next morning, I tried to act normal, tried to focus on my work, but my hands were unsteady as I fixed the fencing by the horse corral. My chest was tight, and no matter how hard I tried to push the memory aside, it clung to me like a ghost. And then, I saw him. Alexander. Standing near the main house, speaking to one of the ranch managers. His sleeves were rolled up again, his shirt slightly unbuttoned at the top. He looked as polished as ever, like he hadn't lost a second of sleep. Unlike me. For a moment, I thought about avoiding him. But then, he turned. Our eyes met, and everything came rushing back. His expression didn't change at first, but then subtle. So subtle I almost missed it. His jaw clenched. He looked away, and just like that, he was gone. What the hell was going on? The day dragged on. I worked harder than usual, hoping exhaustion would clear my head. It didn't. By the time the sun was setting, I was back in the barn, brushing down one of the horses. The place was mostly empty, just the sound of crickets outside, the occasional soft huff of a horse shifting in its stall. Then, footsteps. I didn't have to turn around to know who it was. The air changed, thickened. My grip on the brush faltered for half a second. Then, his voice. Low. Controlled. You're avoiding me. I turned slowly, my heart hammering. Alexander stood a few feet away, his hands in his pockets, his green eyes unreadable. I forced a chuckle. You're my boss. Pretty sure I see you enough. He exhaled through his nose, stepping closer. Too close. You know that's not what I meant. I swallowed hard. I don't... Then he took another step. My back hit the wooden stall door. His hands were still in his pockets, but his body language? All tension. I shouldn't have... He stopped, running a hand through his hair, frustrated. I wasn't breathing. The barn felt too quiet. Finally, Alexander exhaled, resigned. I keep thinking about last night, he admitted, voice lower now. I thought if I ignored it, it would go away. I felt something crack inside me. What if I don't want it to? I whispered before I could stop myself. His entire body went still. His fingers twitched at his sides like he was holding himself back. And then, he gave in. He reached for me again, this time not hesitating. His fingers curled around my forearm, hot, firm, deliberate. The The moment his skin touched mine, I melted. Everything inside me screamed that this was wrong. But I didn't move. Couldn't. His breath was warm, his body so close I could feel the heat radiating off him. His eyes flickered down to my lips. And for 1 second, one impossibly long second, I thought he was going to do it. I thought he was going to kiss me. But then, a voice shattered the moment. "Boss, you in here?" Alexander yanked his hand away like he had been burned. I stumbled back, my heart pounding. One of the other ranch hands stood near the barn entrance, looking between us, oblivious to what had just almost happened. Yeah," Alexander said quickly, straightening. His voice was back to normal, smooth, controlled, like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just touched me, like he hadn't just looked at me like he wanted to break every rule he lived by. The worker nodded. "They need you at the stables." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Right. Be there in a minute." The worker left. Silence. Then, Alexander turned to me. His green eyes were unreadable again, his expression carefully blank. "This never happened," he murmured. And then, he was gone, leaving me in the dim barn, my body still trembling from his touch. And for the first time in my life, I realized I wanted something I wasn't supposed to have. The barn felt colder once Alexander was gone. I stood there, my breath uneven, my skin still buzzing where he had touched me. His words echoed in my head. This never happened. But it did. It did. I pressed a hand against my chest, trying to steady my breathing. I should have let it go. I should have walked away. But I couldn't. Not after that. The next few days were torture. Alexander avoided me. Completely. No stolen glances, no casual interactions, nothing. It was like I had suddenly ceased to exist in his world, and it drove me insane. Because all I could think about was that moment in the barn, the tension, the way he looked at me, the way he almost kissed me. I tried to convince myself it didn't matter. Tried to act normal, focus on my work, push him out of my head. But at night, lying in bed, my mind always drifted back to him. And I hated that I wanted more. One evening, after finishing my tasks, I was heading back to the bunkhouse when I spotted him. Alexander. He was standing alone by the corral, leaning against the wooden fence, staring out at the horses. The sky behind him was painted in deep oranges and purples, the last light of the sun stretching across the ranch. I hesitated. Every part of me screamed to turn around, to leave him alone. But my feet moved before my brain could catch up. I walked up beside him, gripping the fence with both hands. "You gonna keep avoiding me forever?" His jaw tightened, but he didn't look at me. "This isn't a game, Joey." I scoffed. Never said it was. Silence stretched between us. I could see the muscles in his arms tense beneath his rolled-up sleeves, like he was fighting himself. "I can't." He exhaled sharply. "I can't do this." "Do what?" I pushed. He finally turned his head, and when his eyes met mine, I felt it. The same tension from the barn. The same pull. The same thing neither of us wanted to admit. "This," he said, voice low. I swallowed hard. "Then stop looking at me like that." His lips parted slightly, but no words came out. I stepped closer. Just a little. Just enough to make my point. "Stop pulling me in and then pushing me away," I murmured. His breathing was uneven now. I could hear it. "Joey." My name sounded different when he said it. Rough. Like it was a confession. Like it was dangerous. I didn't think, didn't hesitate. I reached out, grabbing his wrist. His skin was warm, solid, and he didn't pull away. I could feel his pulse beneath my fingertips, fast and unsteady. My throat was dry. "Tell me you don't feel it." Alexander closed his eyes, like he was surrendering to something he had been trying to resist for too long. When he opened them again, something inside him had broken, and then he moved. Before I could react, he turned, pushing me back against the fence. My breath hitched. His hands gripped the wood on either side of me, caging me in. His chest was just inches from mine. His scent, his heat, everything about him was too much. His eyes burned into mine. I tried to fight it. I barely had time to register his words before. He kissed me. It wasn't soft. It wasn't hesitant. It was desperate. Months of tension, of silence, of unsaid things, all of it crashed into that kiss. His lips were firm, commanding, like he was trying to claim something he had been denying himself. I gasped against his mouth, gripping his shirt, pulling him closer, because I needed this too. Needed him. Then he pulled back. His breathing was ragged, his eyes clouded with something dangerous. "This is a mistake," he muttered. I didn't let go of his shirt. "Then why do you keep making it?" His hands tightened around the fence. His whole body was tense, like he was about to break apart. But then, his gaze dropped to my lips again, and he made his choice. He kissed me again, this time, slower, like he was memorizing me, like he had already lost the fight. And I knew. There was no turning back now. That kiss should have never happened, but it did. And now I couldn't unfeel it, couldn't unlive it. Alexander pulled away first, his breath uneven, his hands gripping the fence like it was the only thing keeping him steady. His forehead almost rested against mine, but at the last second he straightened. "This can't happen," he muttered. I swallowed hard, my lips still tingling. "It already did." He clenched his jaw, looking away, like he was fighting himself all over again. But then, his gaze snapped back to mine, burning with frustration. "You don't understand what this means." "Then, explain it to me." Silence. I could hear the horses shifting in the corral, the wind rustling through the trees. But between us, the air was thick, charged, like neither of us could move without setting something off. Then, before I could say anything else, he turned and walked away. And this time, he didn't look back. Alexander avoided me for days. This time, it wasn't just silent glances or unspoken tension, it was complete distance. He wouldn't even look at me. I should have let it go. I should have taken the hint. But every time I saw him, something in my chest tightened, like I had unfinished business with a man who refused to let himself feel anything. And then, one night, it all came crashing down. A storm had rolled in, heavy rain pounding against the ranch. I was closing up the stables when I turned, and there he was, standing in the downpour, watching me, drenched, his shirt clinging to his chest, his hair dripping, his jaw set like he had been battling something inside himself all damn day. I opened my mouth to speak, but before I could, he was on me. He shoved me against the stable door, his hands gripping my waist, his mouth crashing against mine with something fierce, something desperate. I gasped into the kiss, my fingers digging into his soaked shirt, pulling him closer because this was real. He growled against my lips. "Tell me to stop." I didn't. I kissed him harder, and just like that, we stopped pretending. The storm raged outside, but inside the stable it was quiet. Except for our breathing, except for the way he ran his fingers through my wet hair, like he wasn't ready to let go. He didn't speak right away. Neither did I. We had crossed the line. There was no turning back now. After a long silence, I finally whispered, "Are you done running?" Alexander exhaled sharply, pressing his forehead against mine. "I don't know how to stop." I gripped his shirt, holding on to him like he might slip away. "Then don't." His green eyes met mine, raw, conflicted, wanting. And then, for the first time, he didn't fight it. He just let himself feel. The end. If this story made your heart race, don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications. Because sometimes, the most unexpected love stories are the ones we can't walk away from.